Central PA's People and Perspectives podcast, produced by the Cumulus Harrisburg News Department.
Good morning, and thank you for joining me for today's edition of People and Perspectives. I'm Christine Rookie, and joining me today is Becky Pringle, president of the National Education Association, and Lauren Peck, volunteer with Pennsylvania Moms Demand Action for Gun Sense. Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning, Christine.
Now, as our nation continues to reel from the deaths of 19 students and 2 teachers at Robb Elementary in Uvalde, Texas, the second largest school shooting in U.S. history, the old debate on gun violence seems to have returned. Is it the guns, mental health, or maybe the solution is arm our teachers and others at the schools? Becky, you testified at this week's hearing on the matter at Capitol Hill with the House Oversight and Reform Committee. As the leader of the largest teachers union, what do you have to say on the matter?
Oh my, Christine, it was an emotional day for all of us. It was gut-wrenching to hear the student survivors from Uvalde tell their horrific stories. It was so sad to hear parents talk about their little girl that they just had to bury. And the pediatrician described how he was trying to save the lives of students whose bodies had been riddled by an assault weapon. But it was inspiring to listen to the students and parents and community activists who were survivors tell their stories, push through their pain and grief and trauma, all of that. And it was infuriating to watch some members of Congress completely dismiss their stories and try to distract everyone from what we all know we have to do, which is pass common sense, comprehensive gun legislation in this country. But we will not be distracted. We will continue to fight to do what's right for our students.
And even before this most recent school shooting in 2020, in fact, you had done a survey about gun violence and what parents and teachers felt about it. What did that survey find?
That we as educators support the kind of comprehensive gun legislation that the majority of Americans support. That includes a ban on assault weapons. It includes closing loopholes in background checks. It includes safe storage of guns. It includes having red flag laws that will identify those people who are extreme risk to themselves and others. The majority of Americans and educators all over this country agree with those solutions. Those are the solutions we're fighting for. And we applaud that Congress passed some of them in the Protect Our Kids Act earlier this week. And we will continue to fight to make sure that the Senate does the same.
So you're saying, though, the solution definitely is not arm the teachers and other staff at the schools. We need this type of legislation in place.
You know, Christine, not only do our teachers overwhelmingly reject that so-called solution, but so do our parents and so do our students. Because we all know that by the time someone shows up with an assault weapon in our schools, it's already too late. It's already too late. We have asked everything of our teachers, haven't we? They have stood in the gaps over these last 2 years to nurture and protect students from a deadly virus. They have learned new techniques to help them to continue to learn. They have always shown up and stood in those gaps for the inequities in our system that prevents so many of our students being able to come to school ready to learn every day. And now we're asking them to carry a gun. That's what we're asking them to do. I want you to think about that for a minute. I think about that every day as a middle school teacher, thinking about right there in Harrisburg. I taught in Susquehanna School District, and I think about my middle level learners, and I would have to store a gun and then try to get a gun out. And that's my responsibility to make a split moment decision to shoot someone. That is not okay. That these distractions are being put in the way of us focusing on passing common sense, comprehensive gun laws in this country. And we will not be distracted by that.
Well, thank you for that. I do think talking, especially at the elementary level, I could see that also if you knew your teacher had a gun in the desk, whether or not that might also affect their mental health and well-being at that age.
Absolutely. And, you know, when we talk about the well-being of our students, we also have to talk about the well-being of our educators, not just our teachers, but all of the people in our schools that are there for our students. And this country must say to all of them, we know what we have to do to keep you safe, and we are going to do it. That is what's going to help them be able to say to their students, this is a safe place to come every day. And for our educators themselves to feel safe so they can do the jobs they love.
And one other debate has been brought up. Is this an American problem or is it a problem across the world? At the hearing, I know it was mentioned using statistics. They were citing between 2009 and 2018, there was 288 school shootings here in the US, only 5 during the same time period in the other G7 countries. So what does that say to you?
That says to me, it's an American problem. Americans are 25 times more likely to be victims of gun violence than any other Western country in this world. And the difference is, we know what the difference is. They have comprehensive common sense gun laws in place in those countries. After they had mass shootings, they took those steps. And by the way, Christine, one of the things that I was so honored to be able to do when I was testifying, but also I joined Gabby Giffords earlier in this week at a press conference, and I joined gun owners. Gun owners are standing with us too, because they know that these are common sense laws that this country needs to put in place so their kids are safe. So they're safe going to a movie theater or going to church or going to a nightclub or to a grocery store. Everyone in this country wants to feel safe, and we know what we need to do to make that so.
Yeah, citing Gabby Giffords, I mean, she's lucky to be alive. She was shot while at a campaign rally by someone who shot into the crowd. She was injured. It wasn't with a semi-automatic type of rifle, because probably she and more people would have been dead, but it's still a tragedy in itself.
For sure, but the damage was done to her and to the other people who continue to suffer that trauma from that day. But Gabby Giffords is such an incredible example, Christine, of the survivors of gun violence who, through all of their pain and trauma, physical and emotional, they continue to push to try to make sure that what happened to them doesn't happen to anyone else. And I applaud her and honor all of those who continue to tell their stories to help others.
So if somebody listening right now is like, yes, I support what you're saying, where do you think they should be going from here?
There are 2 things I want them to do. We supported our students this Saturday at the March for Our Lives event in DC, but that took place all over this country, including there in Pennsylvania. And what we said is that this is just the beginning. So we want you to continue to stand with our students and work with them. And I would ask for everyone listening to join our movement and go to NEA.org/gun violence. There you'll find a multitude of resources so you can talk with your students. You can talk with parents and community members to get them involved. You can find exactly where you need to go to take action, to lift your voices and talk to your members of Congress and to your senators. And you can find tools and resources to not only educate other people, but to advocate and take action.
Great information. NEA.org/gun violence.
That is correct.
Great. Now, the House, after the hearing, did pass a gun package dubbed the Protecting Our Kids Act. As Becky mentioned, it passed 223 to 204, and it contains 7 separate provisions amid addressing gun violence here in America. It does include raising the minimum age for buying a semi-automatic from 18 to 21. It enacts new federal criminal offenses for gun trafficking and straw purchases of firearms. It also seeks to require that ghost guns undergo background checks and receive serial numbers. And maybe most importantly, it seeks to bolster storage of guns in homes where there are minors. The Senate is still working on its own reform measures, so by no means is this a done deal. So Lauren, as a volunteer with Pennsylvania Moms Demand Action for Gun Sense, what do you think needs to be done to curb the gun violence going on in our state and across the country?
As a mom, as a teacher, and as a gun violence prevention advocate, I am thrilled with the measures that the House passed this week. I think all of those measures are excellent starting places, and I will remain hopeful that our senators will respond and act accordingly. One of the biggest things to talk about when we think about these measures is that none of these measures that are being proposed by the House infringe upon the rights of lawful citizens, responsible gun owners. Moms Demand Action is a Second Amendment supporting organization. We believe in everyone's right to a firearm, and so long as you are a responsible, safe gun owner, we have no problem with that. And so these are excellent measures. Over 90% of Americans support closing the loopholes in our current background check system. We do not have a system where there is a background check on every single firearm sale. And this proposal from the House seeks to close some of that. So that would mean that there's a background check on private gun sales, a firearm sale at a gun show. Ghost guns need to be have serial numbers, be traceable. Those are all things that 90% of Americans support and want. And that is really the foundation of sensible gun legislation, is to start with those background checks. So I remain hopeful that our Senate will at least honor that and start to seek to close some of those loopholes.
What about specifically red flag laws? We keep hearing about that. What are your thoughts on that? What does that actually mean?
They're called red flag laws. Legally, they're known as extreme risk protection orders, and their proposal does have red flag laws in there. Extreme risk orders are incredibly important because they provide family members the ability to ask law enforcement to temporarily remove firearms from a person who's a threat to themselves or a threat to other people. So not only is this measure incredibly important for the mass shootings that we are all grieving and reeling over, but we often tend to forget that 2/3 of annual gun deaths in our country are firearm suicide. And extreme risk protection orders can be incredibly important to family members if they have a loved one in the throes of a mental health crisis, that this is a way to temporarily and safely remove firearms. We know that suicide attempts are 85 times more likely to be lethal when a firearm is present. No other means of suicide attempt shares that statistic. So for family members to have a mechanism to remove that weapon in a moment of impulsivity or distress is hugely important. So I really applaud the House for working toward that. I believe the Senate has suggested that they are going to look at extreme risk protection orders as part of their package. That's really one of the only things I've read that the Senate has signaled that they might take up. So, but again, it's a great start. We need to do more. We need to pass every measure possible. And I will tell you too, Christine, my exposure to gun violence, I'm not originally from Pennsylvania. I grew up in Highlands Ranch, Colorado, which is part of the city of Littleton and right next door to Littleton. And I was a teenager in middle school when the Columbine High School shooting happened. I was homesick from school and watching in front of the television when teenagers ran with hands behind their heads through a park, Clement Park, that I had been to many, many times. So that was kind of my introduction to gun violence and how it can absolutely rock a school community, a town, a city. It impacts everyone, and it certainly impacts victims and their families and survivors. But law enforcement, first responders, nurses and physicians who treat gunshot trauma victims, so many people are impacted by this. So I am for and ready, as so many people are, to see change in our country.
Well, thank you for sharing that story. I didn't realize that. And I would say, because I believe, especially when a community, a small knit community gets hit, Uvalde, Newtown in Connecticut, people, they start standing up for their community and change does happen there. Well, small change is good. You really need change on a state or national level to really have the impact be felt all across the U.S. You've seen it firsthand. And that's what sometimes people say. Until it happens to your community, you're seeing it on the news. Like, yeah, you're affected and you cry for the kids, but unless it really hits close to you, like you. And so, firsthand what it's like.
Well, and I think, mass shootings are what grab media attention. They're absolutely devastating. And But I have learned as I've gotten into this work that 110 Americans die every single day from gun violence. In 2020, gun deaths became the leading cause of death for children and teens in America. And the CDC published that report. So there is no community now that is immune to gun violence. It is happening everywhere. It is disproportionately affecting our Black and Brown communities, the daily instances of gun violence. But now I live in central Pennsylvania. Again, I can't speak enough to instances of firearm suicide that affect rural communities, instances of gun threats and injury in domestic violence situations. So again, like I learned about gun violence from a horrific, devastating event in my community, but I have learned and been involved with enough gun violence survivors to know that it is something that impacts our country every single day, in every town, in every city, no matter where you are. And I'm not sure what we're waiting for at this point. I'm just not sure.
And do you think as a teenager looking in is different as a mom looking in?
Yeah, I didn't understand what happened as a middle school. I mean, I understood, but I couldn't grasp the why as a child. And now as an adult, as a mom, I've asked my own mother, like, how could you put us on the bus, the week after, that happened? And, she said, I never thought it would happen again. Like I never thought something like that could be reoccurring. And I fast forward to now being a mom, the shooting in Uvalde. I'm the parent of a third grader and a teacher. And so those, as it did for so many people, hit very raw and very hard and very real. And I am interested in this work because I am interested in the prevention of those situations. There's so much that we can do before those situations occur, before there is a crisis of a young man who purchased an AR-15 and causes harm, or a teenager who's in a mental health crisis and takes their own life with a firearm. Even as the House is proposing some safe storage laws, 4.6 million children in America live in homes with unsecured firearms. We have so many instances, particularly in Pennsylvania, of children who find weapons in the glove compartment of a car, under the bed, in a drawer.
Yeah, I was thinking in the sock drawer where people think,
in the sock drawer,
right,
absolutely, right. And I certainly understand some people's logic of why they, it's easy to grab if they needed self-defense or something like that. But I mean, it is on adults to store our firearms responsibly, to store them locked and unloaded and separate from ammunition. Kids are kids. And if they see something that's interesting, they're going to be kids. They're going to explore. And we have a lot of injuries and gun deaths from unintentional shootings when children find unsecured firearms. So again, I support that legislation wholeheartedly. That's something that's preventative. If we can prevent a child from finding a gun and accidentally shooting a sibling or a friend or themselves, why would we not? And I didn't grow up, growing up outside of Denver. I mean, that's not a big hunting spot. There's not a lot of, outdoor. There is certainly, like when you get more into the Rockies, but in Metro Denver, there's not a lot of sportsmen. But I've really learned from friends and family members here. I mean, there's so many responsible, abiding gun owners. They respect, the power of the weapons that they have. They store them locked and unloaded. I've gotten into the habit. We have an adult education campaign, a part of Moms, called Be Smart for Kids, that really trains adults to not only secure their weapons properly, but to ask about the presence of unsecured firearms when your kid goes over to a play date or to a neighbor, and to make that part of common conversation. My kid has a peanut allergy. Can you please make sure there's no peanuts? And do you mind telling me if you have weapons? Are they locked, and are they stored and are they unloaded, stored not loaded with ammunition? And I've made that a part of just my conversation, not to be intrusive, but to acknowledge that kids are kids. And I want to keep my kids safe. I want to keep your kids safe.
That's a great suggestion too, for any parent that might be listening now.
Yeah.
Yeah. You might feel awkward, but would you rather have another consequence? I don't think so.
Yeah. And again, I think really shifting our focus, that it's another safety tool to just ask, just like you would if, maybe you want to know if there's smokers in the home, or, something like that, to just make that a common part and to model that, when my kiddos' friends come over, I offer that information so that it starts to feel more standard to people. So we're looking to make our gun laws safer. We're also looking to change just the culture around conversations about guns. And I've learned a lot from my friends who they themselves are gun owners. Most of my friends that I've had that conversation with are not offended. They're not embarrassed to be asked that, and they're happy to share. So that has been another powerful tool that we don't always consider and think about.
I'm thinking you're mentioning you have friends that have guns. So
Yeah.
You're not saying you don't have to have a gun or you can't have a gun. You're saying responsible gun ownership.
Responsible gun ownership. And you might be surprised to know that we have we have 10 million supporters across the country for Moms Demand Action, but we have gun owners who are part of our organization. We have Republicans, Democrats, military personnel, veterans. This movement and the path forward for gun safety is available to everyone. This is not it doesn't have to be a partisan issue, even though right now in this polarized world that we live in, it's been painted that way. But there are dozens upon dozens, hundreds upon hundreds of gun owners who, again, respect the power of weapons, the responsibility of being a gun owner, and want to see gun safety legislation move forward, that it's necessary. And again, these are not measures that I believe infringe upon the rights of law-abiding citizens. A background check, no big deal. If you can legally purchase and lawfully purchase a firearm and your background check runs through, great. Do we need to close something like a Charleston loophole where the person who was purchasing was a prohibited purchaser? His background check took longer than 3 days, and that licensed gun shop was able to sell him his firearm because that 3-day window had expired. And that was, the shooter who killed so many people in the Charleston, South Carolina shooting. That to me is sensible to close that and extend the length of background check waits.
Right. So your platform is, especially with the bill that just was passed in the House, again, it's not a done deal by any means in itself, but there's still those that were on the House floor that said you are infringing the rights of those who are responsible gun owners. One person in particular, Representative Jim Jordan, he's the Republican ranking member of the House Judiciary Committee. And in his statement, he said, what happened in Uvalde, Buffalo, and Tulsa is as wrong can be, but the answer is not to destroy the Second Amendment, which protects rights to keep and bear arms. So again, why do you believe that is not the case?
I don't see that any of these common sense measures take away the Second Amendment. Again, a background check to make sure that you don't have a criminal record, that there's not a reason that you shouldn't have a firearm, that you're not a danger to yourself or to other people. That's sensible, right? So I think sometimes there's that phrase in the Second Amendment that it's the well-regulated militia, and that's a regulation. I personally believe that is an appropriate regulation, and Moms Demand Action does as well. I don't even know. I'm not sure how you can make an argument that running a background check imposes on the lawful right to purchase if you have no reason why you couldn't in terms of a criminal background. So again, I find these to be sensible. I find these to be preventative. We know that states that have solid gun safety legislation on the books have significantly reduced homicide rates. And our children are dying. I mean, we can't grieve one mass shooting in this country before the next one occurs. That is unacceptable to me. And I don't know what we're waiting for. The gun lobby has pushed an agenda that has been allowed to thrive and grow and put people in positions of power for a very long time. I think most Americans are kind of fed up with that story at this point. Again, because these types of laws are not removing a lawful citizen's right to purchase a firearm.
And you kind of touched on it that each state has different legislation. So good or bad, maybe federal legislation would help ease some of the burden that some of the states are trying to figure out what's going on. In fact, here in Pennsylvania, I thought it was interesting. And I mentioned to somebody that I know is a gun owner, more for hunting, but he's like, I didn't realize that. I said, you have to be 21 to buy a pistol in PA. So why are they holding on so much to semi-automatic weapons, treating that differently of being 18 to 21? Why does that really seem different by some?
I mean, we passed Moms Demand Action it was the first piece of gun safety legislation to pass in Pennsylvania in 10 years when Act 79 was written into law in 2019, which was a law to disarm domestic abusers and those with PFAs. Previously, before that law passed, if you were someone who had been convicted in a court of domestic violence or your partner had a PFA, you had up to 60 days to relinquish your firearms. You could have turned those over to a next door neighbor, a friend, a family member. And Act 79 closed that loophole that once that PFA was written or you were convicted, a court conviction came through, that within 24 hours, you had to relinquish your firearms to law enforcement or to a licensed attorney. But that was the first piece of gun safety legislation that passed in the state in a decade. And again, in the times that we are living in with what we are seeing, that is not acceptable anymore. We've discussed strengthening our background checks in PA. It comes up all the time in every General Assembly, in every session, and it has yet to pass. So for that, I would like to see some federal change then if states are going to continue to be unwilling to address that.
Thank you. And of course, some people also make the argument of mental health treatments. They believe if you have better mental health treatments, you will be curbing gun violence. How do you see this?
I mean, absolutely. I think you have to address mental health, but it's not an either or, it's a both and. Every other peer nation that we compare ourselves to has people with mental health issues, with crises. No one is different from us, but we are the only nation that has such unfettered access to firearms. And when you mix firearm access with a mental health crisis, we start to see some of the damaging effects that we see in our country. So it's both. Why does it have to be that you choose one or the other? I'm an educator, I'm a middle school teacher. I have seen our children and our educators go through the toll on mental health for students and adults and parents if they've been navigating this pandemic is something that we can absolutely not ignore. So legislators who want to propose increased access to mental health, community violence interruption programs, all of those things are wonderful, but we also have to address our access to guns. And that is the thing that is separating the United States. We have 110 Americans who die every single day from gun violence. No other peer nation shares that kind of statistic. So it's both.
Now, somebody might just be hearing of your organization for the first time today, Pennsylvania Moms Demand Action for Gun Sense. Do you have to be a mom to join? What if somebody was interested in learning more information?
No, we are welcome and open to anybody. You do not have to be a mom to be a part of Moms Demand Action. We're a nationwide organization. We are not a partisan organization. So we have Republicans, Democrats, independents. We have mothers and others. So you can be a dad, you can be an uncle, you could be a neighbor, a friend. You can just be somebody who is tired of over and over again catastrophe of gun violence in our country. So to get involved, we've got a really easy system. You can first go to momsdemandaction.org. That's our website. You can also text the word ACT, A-C-T, to 64433. I'll say that again. ACT, A-C-T, to 64433. And that will connect you by zip code to Moms Demand Action groups in your area. We have chapters in every single state across the country. If you would like to raise your voice right now and let the Senate know that you would like them to pass common sense gun safety legislation, you can text the word BOLD, B-O-L-D, to 64433. And that will connect you with your state senators, and you can sign a petition asking them to take bold action on gun safety. Pennsylvania, I think right now with that, we've hand delivered to Senators Toomey and Casey over 15,000 signatures from across the state. And again, that will go, if you text that, they will help you find your senators by zip code.
Terrific. Anything else you'd like to add for our audience today, Lauren?
No, I just think if you are one of the Americans that in the last several weeks have seen what's happened in Buffalo and Uvalde, in Tulsa, in Laguna Beach, in Wisconsin, please just join us. Please get off the sidelines. Again, we are a grassroots, all volunteer organization. We are nonpartisan. We believe in the right to bear arms, but we also believe that there is more we can do to protect our children, to protect each other. So please find a way to get involved, whether you've got an hour a week, 5 minutes a week. We need everybody possible in our movement because our children's lives depend on it. So please join us.
Anything else you'd like to add for my audience this morning, Becky?
Christine, the majority of Americans in this country support comprehensive, common sense gun legislation. We are the majority. We need to make sure that our voices are heard and that our elected officials listen to us. And if they don't, our message needs to be clear. We're going to hold them accountable. We will vote in November.
Well, thank you for your time again. Becky Pringle, president of the National Education Association, and Lauren Peck, volunteer with Pennsylvania Moms Demand Action for Gun Sense. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Thanks, you too, Christine.
And I'm Christine Rickey. That's today's edition of People and Perspectives.
Thanks for listening to Central PA's People and Perspectives podcast. Each week, the Cumulus Harrisburg News Department will explore another topic that affects the people of Central Pennsylvania.